Hello and welcome to another Sunday Superversive Livestream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I'm here with my co host, Anthony Marquetta. Anthony, how are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you, Ben?
I discovered a video where it was some characters who are into pet play. And so they're like, we decided to use another language instead of English for instructions and training and whatnot. And so, of course, the language they chose was German.
Who what? Wait, rewind. I restart that.
It's okay. I also needed to sort of restart my mind. There were some people who were doing the degenerate action, which is known as pet play, where a person
Okay, got that.
transform. Okay, okay, I understand. So they're like, we decided that for the commands, since he's a Doberman puppy, we need to use another language, and we chose German. And I, for one, am not surprised.
The most degenerate of languages for
There
this
is
most
simply no
degenerate of
language
actions.
better. No language better at all for degeneracy. If it isn't the Japanese, it's the Germans. Except, really, if it isn't the Germans, it's the Japanese, and it's rarely not the Germans. So, I hear you got a new game.
Yeah, so I got Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Much like every Assassin's Creed game, I got it. Well, first off, I got it because it was on sale for really cheap. Because number one, I don't give money to people who hate me, and number two, I would not pay full money for an Assassin's Creed game. But every Assassin's Creed game always looks like it's going to be really, really great, and none of them are ever particularly good. And Assassin's Creed Odyssey so far is no exception.
Not
Everybody's like,
even,
it plays so differently than all of the other Assassin's Creed games. It's like an RPG this time. No, it doesn't.
not even like Assassin's Creed Black Flag, the objectively coolest Assassin's Creed.
I don't even really like the naval combat in that much,
Wow.
which is the only reason anybody likes that game.
Yes, because it's the only reason to play that game.
Yes, and sadly, that's also true. But all right, so I figured out a long time ago that number one, the first big problem I have with Assassin's Creed, besides the fact, first off, Assassin's Creed is impossibly woke, but
Yes,
we knew that already, right?
yes.
I mean, it's not the most woke, not by a long shot, but it's woke enough. Uh, it's woke enough to be obnoxious.
Mm-hmm.
So the the Assassin's Creed games first off have this absolutely terrible, like embarrassingly bad frame story things surrounding it, involving them being in the modern day and accessing it through a computer. And for some ungodly reason that I still don't understand why they do this, like it makes no sense to me. They force you to play through these live action or these modern day sections where you're just walking around some vaguely high tech room looking at really boring files in between the cool historical gameplay. The story's not good. None of the characters are interesting. The gameplay is non-existent to bad, except for
Yes.
some very brief bits in a couple of them. And all it does is take time away from what you actually came here to do, which is have fun in cool historical settings with cool platforming mechanics and ship battle mechanics and things like that. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so I don't understand why they do this. Like, I genuinely don't. Someone will have to explain that to me. I don't get the live action sections. I don't get who told them it was a good idea. Odyssey, at the very least, doesn't have a lot, has very little of them. Black Flag and Assassin's Creed 2 and 3 had extremely long modern day sections that were dreadfully, horribly boring. And I can't help but think of, I always compared Assassin's Creed to the Sly Cooper series, and it seems like a bit of an off-the-wall comparison, but actually, like, if you think about it, they're very similar games. They are platformers with stealth elements in the background that are centered around, doing jobs in a larger hub world
Hmm.
with an overarching story in the background. And I always look at Sly Cooper as sort of like, this is what Assassin's Creed should have been, but aged up a little bit, because Sly Cooper, even though it's one of my favorite all-time series, it is a kid's series. Openly, it admits that. It's a kid's series. So age it up a bit, maybe add a little bit more of a difficulty curve, and that should have been more or less what the Assassin's Creed series was. But like, I just think of Sly 3. So Sly 2 and 3 specifically have like these complicated stories, relatively anyway, and they're critically acclaimed, the stories of Sly Cooper, Band of Thieves, and Sly 3, Thieves in Time. As well they should be. They're great stories. Sly 3 is one of the best endings to a trilogy, like one of my favorite endings to a trilogy ever. And Sly 3 opens up. So at the end of Sly 2, because the Sly Cooper games are legit and they laugh, Sly 2 ends with, you have the three main characters, and Bentley, who is your tech guy, is in a wheelchair. He's been paralyzed from the waist down because of the events at the end of Sly 2, which is a kid's game, remember? So we see this happen. Something falls on him and he loses the ability to use his legs. Now he's in a wheelchair. This is permanent. Murray, who is the other character, feels so guilty over, he's the muscle of the group, and he feels so guilty over letting this happen that he has left your gang and like joined a spirit quest in the Australian outback. So, which is both kind of funny, but also like, the game has real consequences. So, what I'm getting at with this is that Sly 3 opens up. They had a little comic that took place in between Sly 2 and Sly 3 to bridge the two games, but when you play Sly 3, most people have never read the comic. So they open up the story with like a 3-minute cutscene. And first off, the Sly Cooper cutscenes are fantastic. They're done in like this Saturday morning cartoon style. That's just really, really great, and it has great voice acting. But Sly says, "All right, so and Sly like fills you in on what happened. He goes, "All right, so after the events of our last mission, Murray left the gang. Bentley's in a wheelchair, and then I met this guy, McSweeney, who told me that I who told me he used to run around with my father back in the day, and he can get me access to the Cooper Vault, which has like all of the treasures from all of the generations of Cooper ancestors. But we would need to get an army of world-class thieves in order to break into the vault. So that's what we're going to do." And that's it. That's the story. And I just think about that. And then I think of those interminably long, ungodly, boring, modern-day sections of Assassin's Creed. And I think, why? Why? Why would you even do that? Like, they fill in all of that backstory with an extremely entertaining, extremely effective 3-minute cutscene. And then you're into the game. And I'm like, there is no reason, if Assassin's Creed wants to insist on having this modern day story, which they shouldn't have, by the way. There's absolutely no reason that the story should even exist. They should just be self-contained historical epics. But if you're going to have it, there is no reason this could not be contained within cutscenes. Like, short cutscenes. It just blows my mind. And I want, everybody talks about how Odyssey and Origins like rebooted the series and turned it into an RPG. Don't believe it. It plays exactly the same as all of the other Assassin's Creed games. Uh, it has the same long build up, even though at least the modern day sections are short. But the prologue, before the main story starts, is so long and so boring. Like, I'm supposed to be running around this big open world performing missions, but there's so much downtime in between the missions, and going from place to place is not interesting. You're just running and running and running, and it looks nice, and that's all I could really say about it. And again, like, I want to go back to like Sly Cooper. When you're going in between worlds in Sly Cooper, navigating the world is always really entertaining because it's all set up as like a jungle gym environment, which they openly admitted, and that's, I guess, some of the freedom from being a more cartoony type of world versus the more realistic world that Assassin's Creed pretends it is.
Hmm.
Uh, Megabuster Shepherd says Sly 2 is the best, arguably, in my opinion. While 3 did have variety, 2 had the best character moments. Sly 2 tends to be considered the best in the series. I think that the Sly Cooper series works best as a whole. The original trilogy, at least. Sly 4 was not that great, but and we the hardcore Sly Cooper fans just pretend it doesn't exist. Uh, just ignore it. But I think that the Sly Cooper series is best looked at as a full trilogy because that tells a full story. However, with that said, I think that Sly 2 is notable because it's again, it's a kid's Saturday morning cartoon type of game, except that it's structured like a tragedy. As in, literally, the characters at the end of the story have ended up in a worse place than than they were in at the beginning of the story. Every Sly has just escaped custody, but he's on his own, and Bentley is paralyzed, and Murray is emotionally devastated. And they've stopped the bad guy, but at what cost? And that's how you go into the third game. Which is why when the third game wraps up everything on a high note, it really, really feels earned. Like they put in all of the work. He also says that gaming has been on a downhill decline since the PS2 days. Yes, it has. All right, that's my rant of the day. And comparing the Assassin's Creed series with Sly Cooper has been like a pet theory of mine for a long time, and now I have a platform to expound about it. Ben, what do you have to say?
I do not believe gaming has been in decline since the PS2 days. I believe that the PS2 days is mostly involved rose tinted goggles. While you could say that there are many great masterpieces on, PS2 or whatever, it's not necessarily the same as saying the quality overall is necessarily better than what we have today. Like,
Uh, you got to be very careful with the way that you put it. I think that nowadays, I think it's sort of like movies. You could find games nowadays just because the indie scene, thanks to Steam, which has its flaws and all of that. But I think as a net, Steam has been a very good thing for the gaming community because
hmm
it's really opened things up to indie creators. And in that sense, yes, you get a lot of great games nowadays, but the big studios are not innovating the way that they did back in the PS2 era.
you see, but they weren't as great a studio as they were back then. Like, sure, you've got Devolver Digital, which is creating all the new and unique and interesting, unique and interesting ideas. And while I will say that there are less, shall we say, iconic um, masterpieces or series lying around, like Prince of Persia, there hasn't been a good Prince of Persia game since I don't even
Sands
know.
of Time.
Easy. So it's, like, sure, there aren't that. And Metal Gear Solid, like the second Kojima left creative control of that, it became immediately like unplayable. And um Assassin's Creed is trash, but Assassin's Creed was always kind of trash. It was just fun
Yeah,
sometimes.
it was never that good.
Assassin's Creed
Assassin's
though
Creed
had
frustrates the hell out of me.
I don't know, I played it. I played over it like twice. The big game, like several times. And I
The
know that
original, or
the
Assassin's Creed 2,
OG,
the first good one, supposedly. So I heard.
it's the first one.
The first one has, like, in the 70s on Metacritic, and remember, this was when critic reviews weren't totally worthless, so it's worth saying. Uh, the first one that's like in the 70s on Metacritic, but the second one is, I think, the one that everybody remembers as, like, being beloved. Yeah. The first one I've never played. The second one I've tried, never finished.
Warrior Within and Two Thrones are pretty fun. IMO Forgotten Sands was pretty dope. Yes, it was. Yes, it was. But again, I don't know. I just view things differently. It's
I look
I
at the PS2 era. I think of that era as the golden age of 3D platforming because it gave us the three great the PlayStation mascots, which were Jack and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, and the Sly Cooper series.
okay.
All three of which had, like, buckets and buckets of personality and their own unique style and a big cult following. That Sly Cooper didn't get anything after the shitty fourth game uh, is still sad to me, especially because they had the absolute gall to end the fourth game on a really obnoxious cliffhanger after wrapping everything up perfectly in Sly 3. Like, Sly gets the girl, Murray goes off on his own, Bentley gets the girl, and then Sly 4 is like, Sly is now trapped in Egypt, back in time, and that's it. That's the end. And I guess that's where he dies. That's just the end.
Maybe he says maybe it's because it was the one I grew up with. I hold the Genesis era in similar regard. The So there are some things that we can say were better. Yes, platforming was better in those days. People had better ideas, but there was also like all the different like crappy games that no one remembers, or we only remember it long enough to watch a
Well,
donkey
sure, but
video
that's
about it.
because we're looking at, like, how much did it innovate? How much did it affect the industry? How much do we remember? Versus how much are we going to remember from what's being made today?
You see, I don't. You see, let's see. I'm gonna pull up my. Oh my goodness. I'm gonna pull up
The
my
thing
Steam
is
account.
that I will say right now that while we're on this chat, if it sounds at all, like, I am not an expert in gaming. I'm not a gamer. I don't consider myself a gamer. I never did. Uh,
Hold on a
so
second. Hold on a second.
I can't expound on history of gaming. Go ahead.
Now listen here, Zoomer. I understand that these things aren't as full of memes as you like, but hold on a second. I don't know if you guys heard me opening up my can of Monster Zero Ultra, but that's what I opened. And that was the click click. But uh so so let's talk about games that were released recently. Not BioShock, not PlayStation 2 era. That is the limit.
Right.
I am going to include reboots, but only if they are significantly different from what they were before.
That's fair. Okay.
So we have BioShock, Doom, the 2016 and Eternal.
So you mean Bioshock Infinite?
Yes,
Bioshock Infinite will not have the same impact as the original Bioshock. It didn't.
you're absolutely right. I'm just saying that it's part of the series.
That's
Doom,
fair.
Hotline Miami, Left 4 Dead. If you want indie, we've got Risk of Rain. We've got um, Team Fortress 2 before Valve
Oh
got
well,
big.
if you want to go indie post PS2 era, then my one of my all-time favorite games, FTL.
Yep. Enter the
Hades
Gungeon,
just came out this year.
Celeste, Binding of Isaac. Um, I'm literally just
Portal,
going through. Was that
Portal,
Portal? Uh,
Portal. Even though that's a long time ago now, that is post PS2 era.
yep. Payday, the Payday series. I'm literally just, even if I don't really play them myself, I'm still like mentioning them. Shovel Knight. Uh, and I'm avoiding things like strategy games because, like, sure, Star Wars Empire at War, probably the best Star Wars strategy game ever made. Um, if we're
Ori and
looking,
the Blind Forest,
yep,
Mark of the Ninja.
there's Battlefield Gothic Armada, which is probably the only thing that'll match that. And like Death Stranding, for all the crap people talk about it, it's still probably the best AAA game I've played so far, and I still haven't beaten it because I've been playing too much Total War 2 and not writing. Mega Buster Shepherd says Vampire and Styx Master of Shadows. I don't know Styx. But if you're talking about like stuff like Fury, Hollow Knight, I mentioned Hotline Miami. There's Hyperlight Drifter, which was really popular for a bit. Um, there's the Middle Earth series. There's all the SCP games that are coming out. Sekiro. Skipping my uninterested section, which is probably longer than it should be. It's 122 things long. You have Nier Automata, though. No, it's substantially different from the other ones. Let's see, and those are the stuff that I don't have it. Like, there's other things, Masterworks, that we'll never get a sequel, like Warhammer 40k Space Marine. There's the Batman series, Bastion, um,
The Trine series, which I'm a big
Darksiders,
fan
Dead
of.
Space.
Trine,
Even though,
Trine 1 through 4,
yep.
especially two, especially Trine 2 and Trine 4 are great games.
So here's something interesting. Even though the acting and the animation is better, I do not view Deus Ex Human Revolution as significantly different from its predecessors to count for my list.
Interesting. That is interesting.
There's, like I won't include Skyrim either because I know that some of its things were PS4, not Skyrim itself. Um, we mentioned all the Valve
See,
stuff.
though, as far as all of these great games go, part of it is just because this is when I'm playing games, so I know all of this stuff. But when you talk about, like, what's going to
Mass
affect
Effect.
the industry, what will people remember versus what did they remember from the PS2 era of gaming, and why do people consider it better? Because I am immediately skeptical of anyone who says, "Oh, well, it's just rose-colored glasses." Because that's always the disqualification argument that SJWs try and pull.
You see,
Yeah,
to me, like,
so I don't trust it.
I don't trust it always. Like, I let's see here. Let me pull up something. Sure, games like not Valkyria Chronicles, Odin Sphere, and other things that sort of went around it were like genuinely better games than they should have been. Beautiful games, but like the thing that bothers me about the PS2 era is that even though they were pretty good games in their own right, and I'm not going to claim they had better writing or anything like that, or worse writing or any other type of writing, other than the natural one that comes with games, is that I know and I've seen like so much garbage in it that while the masterpieces were masterpieces, it was no different an era than the one we're in now. There were always AAA titles that fell flat forward and collapsed. There were always
I don't know. way too like to be clear here, I don't even really have an argument with you just because I don't know enough about the history of gaming. But I just listened to, for example, Literature Devil is a good YouTube channel if you've never heard him. I recommend him. But he did a whole thing, a retrospective on Comicsgate, where he was comparing comics from the modern SJW Marvel era versus the classic Marvel era. Trying to compare one on one. The origin story, for example, of Daredevil issue 1 and Captain Marvel. And this is actually a really good example because this kind of gets to the heart of what I'm trying to say. So, years ago, I actually have a review of Daredevil issue 1 because I'm a fan of Frank Miller era Daredevil, especially Daredevil Born Again is one of my favorite comics ever. I think it's fantastic, which was Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli, who then collaborated on Batman Year One as well, which is also pretty good. But
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Anyway, so Stan Lee wrote Daredevil issue 1, and I reviewed it years ago. Daredevil issue 1 is actually terrible. Like, it was really bad. The art is great. It had great artwork, but the writing was it was corny. It was nonsensical. Daredevil's costume looks ridiculous. It didn't really make sense. Matt Murdock wasn't a compelling character, and it was a Spider-Man ripoff. It was very open about the fact it was a Spider-Man ripoff. I think there were 3 or 4 Spider-Man advertisements in the issue, like including a big thing that said like from the creator of Spider-Man, because Spider-Man had just come out, been a mega hit, and they were trying really hard to milk that. And it was Frank Miller who came in and turned Daredevil into from the brink of cancellation to one of Marvel's most popular characters, like single-handedly. He basically rewrote the character, and he's good. But he
Mm-hmm.
compares Daredevil issue 1 to Miss Marvel issue 1, and the conclusion isn't so much that Daredevil is better than Miss Marvel, but that Daredevil gives you what a superhero story is supposed to be. Like Daredevil issue 1, it starts off with a fight scene. Then it gives us the character of Matt Murdock, and Matt Murdock, for all of how weird and lame the writing is, Murdock as a character hits the notes you have to hit for a superhero story. Daredevil issue 1 hits all of the beats that you are expecting it to hit when you open up the cover. As you read through the book, and by the time you reach the last page, it will have given you exactly what you were expecting. It won't have given it to you it won't have done a particularly good job of it. It won't have elevated the material, but it will have been a workmanlike, this is a superhero origin that gives you everything that you need for a solid, bare bones introduction to this character. Miss Marvel did not. Miss Marvel featured one fight scene. As it turns out, the fight scene was actually fan fiction that uh, Miss Marvel was writing in it. The main conflict involved her being so Muslim that her parents didn't want her to go to a party, so she sneaks out and goes to the party, and then she's handed the powers, and then the issue ends. Now, as Literature Devil pointed out, and I remember this, I had read Miss Marvel years ago when it came out with like the Hugo nominees in the Sad Puppies era and whatever. And I remember reading and going, honestly, it's not really that bad writing wise. And he agreed. He said, honestly, it's not really that bad, but it's not a good superhero story. Whereas Daredevil issue 1 is like a platonic ideal superhero story. And this sort of gets to what I'm thinking with this point. I don't know if it's so much that the PS2 era games were like so much better than modern day games or modern AAA games, but that even the games that weren't good were at least trying to give you, something that the player could enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas nowadays with AAA gaming, you get The Last of Us saying, if you don't like it, F you. You know,
Right.
which
Which
is
is
an
inappropriate.
unthinkable attitude.
Yep. No argument from me about that.
So it's the same idea where, you know, you have to be careful about rose colored glasses. Like, as he goes through Daredevil issue 1, I can testify from my own reading that on a writing level, you could even make the argument that Miss Marvel issue 1 was technically better than Daredevil issue 1 in some notable ways, but it was an inferior superhero story. Nor was it trying to be a superior superhero story, which makes it even worse for that.
Right.
Whereas, just like the PS2 era was innovating in some way and was giving you different and interesting things that weren't necessarily better than what we're getting nowadays, but are, I don't know, they cut more to the heart, I think, of what people are looking for when they play these games, you know?
Yes. So I agree with you. Um, I think also that whatever you might think of the writing of things like Miss Marvel, as long if something is not true to its intended purpose, in other words, if it's not the platonic ideal of itself, then it's not good writing by definition.
Yes. Like, he kind of, Literature Devil kind of said it. He was kinder to Daredevil issue 1 than I was. I thought it was really bad. But he was, yeah, he even says about Miss Marvel issue 1, he goes, so as the opening of like a teen drama, it's not awful. You know, the characters, they act in character, right? Like what they say and do makes sense. There is a conflict there. As the opening of a superhero story, it's a total failure.
Mm-hmm.
And Miss Marvel, for whatever else they want it to be, is a superhero story.
Yep.
The PS2 era of gaming, you know, I bring it up. Like I said, you know, I call it this, even though I'm sure that there are smarter people out there who could probably point to a different era, but I've always referred to that era of gaming as the golden age of 3D platforming because of the Jack and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, Sly Cooper trifecta that came out. 3D platforming is a much maligned genre, and for good reason, which is why it's just hard for me to imagine that there was ever a period of time where more high quality games came out in a, you know, franchises like came out in a similar time scale. But Sly Cooper is a great example where can't really think of any AAA game that's making games with the sort of personality that Sly Cooper had. There are indie games that are doing it. You know, Ori and the Blind Forest has a completely different, you know, personality and a completely different appeal than Sly Cooper. But it, if you've seen Ori and the Blind Forest, it just oozes personality. You know, and I just finished Hades, which is a fantastic indie game. Same thing. The appeal is not the appeal of Sly Cooper, but in its own right, it oozes its own personality. But Sucker Punch, for example, which was the Sly Cooper studio, they came out with Ghost of Ghost of Tsushima recently,
Wait,
and
that was
Ghost
them?
that was them. Yep, that's the Sly Cooper
Huh.
studio.
Wow.
And Ghost of Tsushima ended up getting a lot of positive press because it came out like right after The Last of Us, and much like with what was the name, Alita Battle Angel, that came out right after Miss Marvel, it was kind of primed for everybody to jump on its bandwagon, you know,
Yeah.
so that everybody really wanted to jump on their bandwagon after The Last of Us 2 came out because it made for a good story. Like, here's this company that's just trying to make a good game and giving people what they want, but in the end, even though the Ghost of Tsushima is quite good, it's still much more in the vein of something that's been done before, as opposed to Sly Cooper that was creating this, you know, Saturday morning cartoon feel to it and was really going off in the weeds and doing its own thing, you know, in a way that Ghost of Tsushima was just kind of like if you look at Ghost of Tsushima, it looks like a very nice looking AAA game. You know, like every other AAA game. The visual style of it is generic AAA game, like Assassin's Creed. That's the visual style of Assassin's Creed. Generic AAA game. People aren't really doing that sort of thing anymore unless they're continuations of those old franchises.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a shame.
Like, I don't doubt that we've got our problems in this generation. But also, I see that, like there's still a certain amount of, how do I want to put it? Like, just not working together, I guess I'll say. That that I wish it did. Like, even though a lot of the games back then were actually a bit ugly, um, like the Tomb Raider games didn't look great. Well, that was more PS1, wasn't it?
Well, the Tomb Raider games were PC games, actually. They were put onto, I think they might have been ported to
Ported.
PS1, but they should
Yeah.
get they I think they should be considered PC games.
See, my problem is that even though I was old enough to do like Super NES and stuff like that, I really skipped from like PC Commander Keen and Age of Empires. And I'm not even joking. Like it was Commander Keen and Age of Empires and stuff to like Super Mario Brothers. So my feel is like super
I have
weird.
played very little Mario.
Trash. All right. The gasp is what made it.
So even honestly, I hate to say it because I have been greatly enjoying Sword and Shield, but even Pokemon, uh, the eighth generation of Pokemon was in many ways a step down from the previous Pokemon games, but and in really bizarre ways too.
Mm-hmm.
Then, but it's sort of endemic of all of the problems that the modern era has. So, the older Pokemon games, take Pokemon Generation 4. And this is something like I'm about to go all Poke nerd on you guys, so get ready for this. Uh, Generation 4 is well known. Pokemon became kind of famous after Generation 2 for its region design, the specific worlds, Kanto, Johto. And Generation 4, even now to this day, to Generation 8, has the largest region of all, Sinnoh. Now, Generation 4 also has probably the most nonsensical story of all of them until Generation 8's absolute abortion of a story that was just awful. I
It was
really like Pokemon Sword, but the story in Pokemon Sword was just horrendous. But whatever. Anyway, Pokemon Generation 4 had a story. It didn't really make sense. The more as soon as you thought more than 2 seconds about it, and the pacing of the game was kind of off. It didn't really work, and technically it was not the hardest game to program because it has the typical Pokemon rock paper scissors thing. Graphics wise, it looked average for the era at best, maybe a little bit below average, which is basically like every Pokemon game up to Generation 8, which now is both the best looking Pokemon game and the worst looking Pokemon game simultaneously because it is the worst in regards to its era. Uh, it looks worse. It looks better than every other Pokemon game and worse than every other Switch game.
ugh.
But so you have Generation 4 though. However, Generation 4, at the very least, the Sinnoh region was massive. And they put a ton of work into the world building of the Sinnoh region and the design of the region and giving you interesting, cool places to explore and do. And,
Right.
you know, there's just so much there and so much to discover. And in Generation 8, there's like nothing to discover. But, you know, the Pokemon get really big and really detailed, and the animations look nicer, even though they're still way below what they should be for a Switch. And I don't think that Pokemon Sword and Shield were bad games overall. I think that they were solid. But that's the thing. They were just, they were just kind of solid. They were alright. They were fine. But there wasn't any of the passion that you saw in the previous Pokemon games. Even Generation 7, which is something that, a lot of Pokemon fans look down on. I just replayed Generation 7. Yeah, that milk tank. Whitney's milk tank. Whitney's milk tank, the normal gym. Anyway,
That took me so
Generation.
long to beat. Like,
Go ahead.
not even joking. Whitney's Mill Tank, like, wrecked me. I had to.
That's still like
Yeah.
I'm a big Pokemon, like, and I watch like people do challenge runs with Pokemon and whatever. I'm open about and Whitney's milk tank in the Pokemon community has gone like down in legend. It's Whitney's milk tank in the Goldenrod City in legend as one of the hardest gym leaders in all of Pokemon. But Heart Gold and Soul Silver are
Yeah.
fantastic. Arguably the best games in the whole. I have to admit, I am very partial to Generation 5 because the Generation 5 games are based on the New York, New Jersey area. And how many times can you play a Pokemon game set in New Jersey? Got to admit, that's kind
So,
that's
I just realized
the
that the
thing.
captain of my army is named Zawada, and he has a really beat up army, and he got caught out of position. So mentally, I'm like, that's a lot of damage, and I'm like, no, they wouldn't make that pun, but they did.
Oh man, roll out.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm looking at your comments. Yeah, Whitney's and Miltank's roll out. The funny thing is that if you actually learn how to play as an adult, there are various ways you could strategize around that mill tank that aren't that difficult. But at the time, it just kind of comes at you out of nowhere in a relatively, that's considered one of the most relatively easy games. The Generation 2 games, and Whitney's mill tank just comes at you out of nowhere, wrecks everybody.
Right.
But yeah, I actually don't think that Pokemon Sword and Shield are bad games by any means. I think they do what you want a Pokemon game to do, but they don't have the passion to them, even in just certain elements that the older games had. Even Generation 7, I think, gets too much of a bad rap. Like Generation 7 has its flaws like the other ones, but on the one hand, it has the region design of Alola in Generation 7. They do a really good job making Alola feel like a very lived in place. And more importantly, in Ultra Sun, the Rainbow Rocket episode slaps because that involves a dimension traveling Giovanni and his Mega Mewtwo gathering up all of the leaders of all of the evil teams in all of the generations into his super mega evil group, Rainbow Rocket, and then taking over the multiverse one universe at a time.
It's fantastic. It's unironically fantastic.
And perfection. That's that remakes of Pokemon games, like they would have like a third game remake that would be the deluxe version. This was added in like the remake of Sun and Moon, and unironically, the Rainbow Rocket episode of Ultra Sun is worth the price of the entire game on its own. Just the concept. Like, who thought of that? I want to know. Because I want to be like, you, sir, deserve a raise. Yeah, just Giovanni in the universe that he wins and defeats the kid who is the main character, decides he's going to take his Mega Mewtwo and conquer the multiverse by gathering up all of the evil team leaders from all of the games in which all of the universes where they won and defeated you, and form them on his super team, and then you will need to stop him and all of the evil team leaders all at once. And this was just like a bonus thing at the end of the game, and it was unironically like worth the price of the entire game.
That's fantastic.
That we would get something like that again, but we don't. Unfortunately, Gen 8, we did get a couple of DLCs for Gen 8, and they were not bad DLCs. They were pretty good DLCs, actually. See, what it looks to me like Gen 8 was trying to push this thing with the wild area, which was, now you have a 3D camera that rotates around you, and Pokemon are wandering in the overworld, find them, and whatever.
Hmm.
And while it is kind of cool, I think that they implemented it too soon. It needed more play testing because the DLCs were improvements over the version that we got in game. So they were clearly improving on it, and I'm hoping that with the next Pokemon game that comes out, maybe this will be something that'll be a really nice feature. Because Sword and Shield were good enough, I'm definitely going to get the next game. Remember, Pokemon's different than other Western companies in that even if you don't like it as much, they haven't betrayed me in the way that, like, Bethesda or Ubisoft or whatever betrays customers. Pokemon only betrayed me by, oh man, I wish they made a better game. you know, so
Right.
I'm still loyal to Pokemon as a company in that sense. Like, I haven't given up on them as a company. I'm hoping that the next game is good, and I'm really, really hoping, like every other Pokemon fan, that they finally remake Gen 4. Since the Sinnoh games are the only games that I haven't actually played in full, uh, and I would really want to see what they do with a remake on current technology and with a generation now, with a full game and DLC of practice. I am very curious to see what they do with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Pokemon, they have not. Pokemon hasn't lost my loyalty. There is a world of difference between, you know, Naughty Dog hates me and doesn't want me to give them money because I'm conservative, and Pokemon made a game that I wish was better. So I'm more than willing give give them more of a chance.
I completely understand. Personally, I am not so. I'm not sure what doesn't hit me so hard. But then again, different times. I'm a Gen Y and you're a filthy millennial. It is what it is.
Oh, I was part of the generation. Like, you have to understand when I say, like, Pokemon was mainstream. Consider, like, the Pokemon cartoon, the Pokemon anime. That's the first thing. We didn't call it the Pokemon anime. It was the Pokemon cartoon, and everybody watched it. And when I say everybody watched it, I mean, like, I don't even mean like Naruto. Naruto was popular, but Naruto was something that you watched if you were like into anime, and I didn't really watch Naruto growing up. Pokemon, everybody watched. It was that popular. And when I grew up with Pokemon, like, I got the every game when it came out up to Generation 3. Then I took a break. then I took a break from the games for a while. Then I decided to get Ultra Sun, and I really enjoyed it. And I bought Sword on release day. So that's the thing that you need to understand that, like, I don't know if people who aren't in my age group understand that just how mainstream Pokemon was. Like, like it was not in it wasn't an anime thing. It was like any other show that anyone else was watching, and everybody watched Pokemon. And the thing is that it's hard to say, looking back on it now, it's obvious that the original series Pokemon, the Indigo League they call it, Pokemon, is the Indigo series Pokemon is not that good. However, you have to remember, like, what it was compared with at the time. There was nothing like Pokemon on TV, especially in the West. You get like Recess, Hey Arnold, SpongeBob, then Rugrats. All of these shows, some of which are very, very good, by the way, like Kim Possible and whatever. But then
Yes.
you have this show about a kid. Yeah, so some of them are good. I'm not saying that they're not good shows, but they're nothing like Pokemon. You have this kid now who's going on this adventure with his friends around the world, getting into battles and things. There was nothing like it. Yeah.
I mean, it's true. That's
So
I
yeah,
have I don't.
I just grew up with Pokemon.
I mean, for me, it was a similar experience with like Digimon. There was nothing like Digimon running around. Um, you know what did it was amazing. It was fantastic. It never sort of got old for a while. Anyway, but
The other thing is, for whatever reason, I don't really know why, I never got into TAU. Uh, I don't know. I actually don't know why. There was the only show I ever watched with any amount of regularity in the DCAU was, of all things, Static Shock. And the only reason was that it happened to air on Cartoon Network, I think. And
Digimon
Static
Emperor
Shock.
Best Arc, trash opinion, Mega Buster Shepherd. Actually, no, there were some really good arcs in that, especially with Black War Greymon. But I still have a fond memory in my heart of my Otismon, as well as uh, the Four Emperor arc, because that was pretty sweet, honestly. Um, Especially when they killed off some characters. It's like, ah, they've actually killed off a character. Ho ho ho! I never expected it.
I never watched Digimon. That's the thing. Growing up, I did not watch anime with the one and sole exception, again, of Pokemon. But you gotta understand that, like, for us millennials, Pokemon wasn't an anime. It was just a cartoon.
Right. No, it
Yeah.
was the same thing for my generation, but what I'm talking about is like, how do I want to put it? Like One Piece, right? The legendary Four Kids dub.
I've I've never watched it except for clips on YouTube, and the clips do make me crack up.
I know, right?
I gotta say, the one where Nami is going, remember, it's a rubber knife. Just had me dying. Somebody
I
made somebody made a thing, the Full Metal Alchemist for Kids dub, and it's hysterical. I recommend it. They just have Ed come up and he goes, "Hello, my name is Edward," and you have and Al is in the background. He goes, "And I am Alfonso," just talking like a robot.
funny.
And then later when he goes to attack Father Cornello, and he pulls the spear out of the ground with alchemy. Just have Ed go, magical friendship stick, rise from the grave. It's really funny. I recommend it.
Mega Buster Shepherd brings up Monster Rancher, which is pretty obscure these days. But
Yeah, Digimon, Pokemon, and Yu-Gi-Oh.
Yep.
But again, even like I believe you with Digimon in your generation, but like even Yu-Gi-Oh and Naruto, which were very popular, they were still like in the category, at least among, like at my school and the people I knew, of anime, right?
Right.
Like you watch them, oh, so you like anime then. Popular anime, Dragon Ball as well was another one. Pokemon was not like that. Pokemon, like, there wasn't even really that concept of it being anime. It was just a show. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it was a cartoon. That's just how popular it was. And that's because, unlike the other ones, it had the games. And I know Yu Gi Oh! Had the card game, but the card game, as popular as it was, and it was very popular, it
Mm-hmm.
paled in comparison to the popularity of the Pokemon handhelds, which were like out of this world, extraordinarily popular.
Yes. So I just wanted to flex my muscles a little bit. Fighting foodons. It was the same thing, except with dishes of food.
That's actually amazing, and I want to see it.
It wasn't as
What's
bad
it
as you.
called?
Fighting foodons. Fighting
Fighting.
foodons. Do, 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 do. Fighting foodons. Do, 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 do.
I'm sure it's bad, but I'm sad that it's bad.
It could only, Anthony, I'm going to tell you this right now. It could only be bad.
That's not true. That idea is gold.
That idea could only be bad. You complain about uh, Shokugeki no Soma. Don't give me that.
I don't complain about Shokugeki no Soma because of the concept. In fact, I like the concept of Shokugeki no Soma. I complain about Shokugeki no Soma because, yeah, I'm not into the fan servicey type of thing that the show is apparently trying to push.
It's
Mega
always
Buster
been
7
there.
says the Game Boy Advance was an awesome system back in the day. Game Boy Advance SP is the best handheld of all time. Don't at me.
I think OG Game Boy was Advance was perfectly serviceable. I remember Chain of
It
Memories.
was. The
So
SP had the backlit screen and a rechargeable battery, and also I still own it.
so here's the thing. Here's
I
the
play it
real
fairly regularly.
here's the real master. The Game Boy Advance ports. Actually, Chain of Memories was a great game. Did you ever try that?
Uh, I owned it. I think my brother played it. I was never that into Kingdom Hearts. I I didn't like actively dislike Kingdom Hearts or anything like that. It was just one of those games that we owned. My brother was really into it. I just never got that into Kingdom Hearts.
So like I enjoyed it because it was over the top, but then like eventually like you can go as over the top as you want. Holy shit.
Well,
But the
Kingdom
thing
Hearts,
is
the
that
appeal of Kingdom Hearts is you get to play with the Disney characters. That's it. That's all I cared about. I didn't care at all about the Final Fantasy aspect of it. I'm sure there are people that did.
I'm about to
I
lose
don't.
another army. The So it's against a high elf like rogue army, and so it's got your usual stuff, some high level troops, that sort of thing, and then you see Black Dragon and 3 siege engines, and I'm like, this is gonna hurt. And it's against a joke army I was testing out too, like it's solid basis, but like it's all skinks, which are not ideal, shall we say. They're lizard men, and so they're kind of weak. And yeah, I'm gonna lose another army. at how huge these guys are. There's a dragon. Where's the dragon?
So on the Game Boy Advance, I do have to admit that the only games I ever played on that system, and still the only games I play, are the Pokemon games. But I play the hell out of them, so yeah, not too sad.
No, wait, they're the Forces of Chaos. Why do they have the Forces of Chaos? And a mix?
So
I'm scared.
here's the other thing with Pokemon: people complaining about Pokemon nowadays having like Pokemon has always had a vaguely predatory business model, starting off from the fact
Vague.
that they have no business releasing two different versions. That's already pretty bullshit that they release two different versions. But worse is their special edition third version, which by rights should always just be a DLC. And now they've released the DLC for Sword. They've released it as DLC for Sword and Shield, and everybody's criticizing that, saying it should have just been the base game, which I think is an unfair criticism. But I get what they're coming from. However, the worst is I am looking right now as I sit in my room at my little bag of games, and Pokemon Yellow is sticking out there. I still own it. That's not my original one. I bought a new one off of eBay because, of course, I did. I mean, yes, you can emulate it, but we all know that's not the same, right?
Yep.
It's just not. It can be fun to play. It's useful for streaming, but it's not the same as playing it on the system it was intended to be played on. So I'm staring at Pokemon Yellow, and as I reflect on that, Pokemon Yellow was the biggest middle finger cash grab. So I don't know if you know the story of Pokemon Yellow or not, but it's a kind of amusing. So of course it was Red, Blue, and in Japan Green version were
Mm-hmm.
massive Mega Ultra Super hits, like way bigger than they anticipated, and they thought it would be big. But it was the sort of big that you can't predict. Like nobody could predict the sort of success that Pokemon had. It was just too far. So
Mm-hmm.
the anime comes out, and the anime is also this super mega huge hit. And Pikachu, of course, is the star of the anime. So they decide they're going to capitalize on this anime stuff, and they are going to make a third game set in the, but they're going to change the story to make it more like the anime. Only thing is, they can't change it too much because that's a lot of work. So instead, they swap out a couple of the sprites. Now, a couple of random Team Rocket grunts are given Jesse James sprites. They update the artwork, which admittedly is a fairly large change, but they update the artwork of the sprites so that the sprites look more like the Pokemon as they appeared in the anime, as opposed to the hilarious red and blue sprites, some of which look absolutely hideous. Look up Pikachu's original red and blue sprite one day. It's so bad, but it's funny. Anyway,
It's so fat.
they
Where's the
what
dragon?
was that?
Isn't it like super fat or something like that?
Yes, I'm typing it in to try and find pictures. It's really funny. But anyway, they update the artwork so it looks more like the anime, which, by the way, is now what all modern Pokemon game art looks like. They did not take the red blue designs. Uh, Luckily, I mean, there were a couple of okay ones, but they were mostly really bad. Here it is. Here's the sprite. This sprite's so bad. I was thinking, am I exaggerating? Is it not really that bad? But no, it's pretty bad. Let me link it to you. And I know I'm being a little bit unfair because they had limited pixel space, but just look at this thing.
Oh my
Wait,
goodness. Please. Dragon, stop eating all my units.
there it
Oh
is.
my goodness.
That is the red blue Pikachu. It's fat, has a little circle on its belly. The tail is skinnier at the front of it, whatever. But
I
Going back
don't
to
dare
Yellow,
put
though.
this
So
up, by
Yellow,
the way.
what was that?
I don't dare put this up for copyright infringement, just so you know.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. Nintendo is brutal with copyright infringement. You'll have to take my word for it then. That Pikachu was ugly. Red blue Pikachu was ugly, but whatever. So anyway, going back to what I was saying, so they take away, how do you make it more like the anime, but without actually changing anything? Well, first thing you do, you change the sprites so that they look more like the anime, which is admittedly something that's kind of nice, and that's the designs that they used from then on, those models. But, don't you want Jesse and James in the game? Only it takes a lot of effort to change the whole story. So why don't we just take a random Team Rocket grunt in the game and replace his sprite with Jesse and James's sprite? And that's what they did. And hey, Ash in the show, he gets all three of the starters. So let's give the player the ability throughout the game to get all three of the starters. And just to make it look as if we're doing more than this, that's basically it. That's like the equivalent of the changes now. I've said them all. Let's change up the movesets and the Pokemon of the teams a little bit so that the experience is a little bit different. And Yellow is considered by, the Pokemon Let's Players. It's generally understood that Yellow is slightly harder than Red and Blue, which is a very easy game.
Mm-hmm.
Not that any of the Pokemon games are hard, but Red and Blue is one of the easier ones. Yellow is generally considered slightly harder. But here is the kicker with the release of Yellow. The Game Boy was ending its lifespan soon. The Game Boy Advance was going to be coming out pretty soon. And Pokemon Generation 2 was coming out soon. More importantly, even than that. So they needed to get Pokemon Yellow out, before Pokemon Generation 2, which would have a whole new engine and everything. And you couldn't really release this with that when they have that upgraded technology. So they released Pokemon Yellow without beta testing it. Now, anybody who knows anything, or with the bare minimum of beta testing, maybe. Now, anybody who knows anything about the Generation 1 games knows that they are broken. Really badly broken. They're some of the glitchiest games probably ever made that have come out on a mainstream console. They're ridiculously glitchy, and the Pokemon Company had the balls to release a game with all of these changes without actually testing to see what effect these changes had on the game. They
What?
played through it once, said, "Well, you could finish it. Let's release it to the wild." So Yellow is somehow even more broken than Red and Blue. There's even more glitches in Yellow.
Wow.
And some of the glitches in Generation 1 are just hilarious. Hilarious to the point where, you hear that it's a glitch and you go, how the fuck did they let that happen? For example, they make a big deal in the game. It's even a whole episode in the anime. They make a huge, this is a big thing. Ghost is strong against Psychic.
Yes.
And they set up the game in such a way that you can get a ghost Pokemon before you battle the intentionally difficult Psychic Gym.
Yes.
And Rena, who's the Psychic Gym leader, is considered one of the harder ones. Only in Generation 1, there's a problem. Psychic was accidentally made strong against Ghosts. And that's it. That's just the thing. Now Psychic is strong against Ghosts. And that just became a thing. That was not intentional. They make a big deal out of that not being the case. But now that they did it, it's now the case in every following game. Psychic is strong against Ghosts. That's just an accident. And there's a move called Focus Energy. And Focus Energy is supposed to make it so that your chance of getting a critical hit goes up every time you use it. Only in Generation 1, of course, it is glitched. And if you use Focus Energy, it actually lowers your critical hit chance every time you use it. So you're less likely to get a critical hit every time you use focus energy. Just
But why?
insane glitches like that. Things that you go, but how though? Like, who let this happen? Who said this is acceptable? I mean, they were right.
Yeah.
As far as monetary value goes, I mean, they were certainly correct in that it was worth the cost. I mean, to say nothing of the fact that in Cerulean City, right outside of Cerulean City, which is the town that the second gym leader is in, if you go just north of the town, it is very, very easy to soft lock the game there.
Really?
Yeah, completely by accident. So if you walk north of the town, in Generation 1, if a trainer, they changed this in later generations, but if a trainer sees you, he'll walk towards you and stand across from you before you start your battle.
Yes.
Well, there is a spot that is enclosed, and the only entrance is being blocked by this trainer. And you could battle him, and he'll move. And then when the battle is over, you could go around him and go into that little enclave, that he's blocking off, and you could
Yeah.
grab an item in there, which is why that could be useful, right? But
Right.
here's the thing: if you do that, and then you save the game, and then you turn it off and turn it on again, the trainer will be back to where he was standing before, and you will be soft locked. And that's it. You can't get out. You have to restart.
Huh.
I mean,
Okay.
there are multiple ways to soft lock the game. There's a YouTuber named P. Caspery who kind of made his name just soft locking himself in Pokemon, coming up with ways to get out of it, which is kind of fun. But that's probably the easiest way to do it. It's not hard to do. It's not hard to soft lock yourself in Generation One of Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the possibility if you're a really dumb kid, and I mean like you would probably need to try very hard to do this. But if you used up all of your money and lost all of your items, so you had nothing to sell, and you didn't have a Meowth because Meowth's no payday and they could get you free money, then it's possible at one point in the game you need to buy a ticket to the Safari Zone, which is like an area in the game, so you could get
Mm-hmm.
you know, a certain move. And it's possible you could not have enough money to get the ticket, and then you're just stuck forever because there's no one to battle and no way to earn money.
The
And believe
millennial
it or not,
experience.
P. Cassery talked about this, and he said, "Here's what blows my mind." He goes, "So I did this in red and blue to test it, and it works. Like, you'll be stuck if you do this, though you really have to try. But in yellow, they actually fixed this. In Pokemon Yellow, they go, he does that and goes to Safari Zone with no money, and the guy will actually, like, let you in with a limited number of Safari Balls, which is, what you need to navigate through the Safari Zone.
Mm-hmm.
He'll actually let you in if you have no money." And he goes, "This kind of blows my mind because that means that somebody noticed that this was a thing.
Right.
Which that one is at least somewhat reasonable that they would not, that they would kind of miss it. But yeah, the Gen 1 games are so impossibly broken, and it just makes me laugh that Pokemon Yellow was such a quick cash grab. They barely changed anything about it. The changes that they did make were inconsequential and added nothing to the experience, basically. Oh, I didn't even mention the biggest change. The biggest change is that you get a Pikachu at the start of it, and he walks behind you out of the Pokeball. Because, Ash's Pikachu in the anime, he doesn't stay in his Pokeball. So,
That scamp.
in Pokemon Yellow, he walks behind you, which admittedly is the best part of Pokemon Yellow, and it's definitely worth the price. Uh, but in Pokemon Yellow, I just find it really funny that they released this game of this already broken game they released with almost no playtesting afterward, just to get it out as quickly as possible, with nearly no changes. You know, nothing that would substantially change the experience. Certainly nothing worth another $60 that you're going to drop on it. And I just think, like, if you look at reviews of Pokemon Yellow, they're very good. And I'm just thinking, if Pokemon Yellow was released nowadays, Nintendo would be crucified for it. And deservedly so, by the way. Like, it's a pretty shitty thing to do, especially since you're doing it to kids, you know? Like, why would you get Yellow if you're a kid and you've played the other two games? Well, you want the game where you have the Pikachu walking behind you because you watched it in the show, right? That's why I got Yellow. Now, I didn't have the other games. You know, I got Yellow, like, it had all. When I got my first Pokemon game, Yellow already happened to be out. So it wasn't so much an issue of, like, I'm going to get two different games. But that's why you're going to do it. So it's pretty shitty that they take advantage of kids like that. You know, they're not going to give you a substantially different experience. They're not going to improve it in any notable way. They're just going to make the little Pikachu walk behind you and then charge you another $60 for it.
And you'll
Like,
pay it,
that's
won't
kind of
you?
messed up. What was that?
And you'll pay every dollar.
And you know what? I love Pokemon Yellow. It's my favorite one because the Pikachu walks behind you. That's why. That's why it's the best one.
I love it. That's
You can
like
turn her.
such a Chad opinion. I like Pokemon Yellow because the Pikachu walks behind you. And I'm like, yeah.
You can turn around and talk to it, and it'll smile and it'll smile. They, you know, they actually Pokemon for decades like pretended Pokemon Yellow didn't exist, and for good reason. You know, they don't want people focusing on its existence. Uh, Finally, they make their recently the Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee games, which were marketed and which were advertised as remakes of Pokemon Yellow. So of course, I own Let's Go Pikachu on the Switch. Uh,
Right.
I mean, you better believe that I got it. And and in this remake of Let's Go Pikachu, I was immediately like, you know, don't get me wrong, it's nice to see it in the better graphics and whatever. And yes, Pikachu sits on your shoulder this time around. In Pokemon Yellow version, he walks behind you because they have those overhead sprites, and in order to see him, you have to do it that way so that you can see the sprite at all. But now that we have the new 3D sprites, Pikachu sits on your shoulder, which is kind of nice. But in Let's Go Pikachu, when you meet Pikachu, he like high fives you immediately, and you're like best friends immediately. And I'm like, this is bullshit, because I know my Pokemon Yellow, and in Pokemon Yellow, Pikachu hates you when you first meet him. And you gotta win him over by winning battles. And I'm like, you know, we're not really friends. This thing will be friends with anybody. I had to win my Pikachu over.
Right. Doesn't have that same push to it.
No, they soften the edges on a lot of it. They also switch out your rival. Generation 1, you know, the most memorable rivals, if you like talk to the hardcore Pokemon fans, everybody loves the rivals from Generation 1 and Generation 2. That's because the rival from Generation 1 was just like this cocky asshole. And the
Right.
rival from Generation 2 was an actual robber who stole a Pokemon from a guy. And then you're
Yep.
just continually meeting up with him while he yells at you, and you have to keep kicking his ass, which is pretty fun. And they're generally remembered as, like, you know, after that they tried to go like softer and I don't know the word for it, I guess, but like they just try to go softer with their rivals and friendlier,
Yeah.
right? But those first two generations, you know, they go in, you want to beat these guys, right? And in Let's Go Pikachu, instead of giving you the asshole rival that everybody clearly wants, they switch him out with a rival who is just another kid like you, and he's a nice guy. And it changes, and they change the ending too. So famously and hilariously, at the end of Generation 1, when you beat the game, remember, your rival is Professor Oak's grandson, right?
Yes.
And after you beat the game, Professor Oak says, "Oh man, I just missed the battle. I was coming here to congratulate you, my grandson, whose name's, generally given in official stuff as Blue. Whatever. So Blue. I was going to congratulate Blue, but Blue lost, so congratulations, Red," which is,
Ow.
whatever, the generic name for your character, Red.
Right.
And then he says, which is hilarious, Blue, the reason you, like, I'm paraphrasing here, but he basically says, "Blue, I am very disappointed in you. The reason you lost is that you didn't love your Pokemon enough, and you didn't treat them well." It's true, like, in retrospect, you're like, dude, he just beat the Elite Four. He
Right.
was the champion. He's also the same, he's 11. Like, what he did was pretty impressive, wasn't it? I would think.
Right. It's like, yeah, number 2 in the world. Too bad, grandson. No
Yeah, he's
Christmas
like,
presents this year.
you didn't love your Pokemon enough. That was your problem. It's like, I'm very disappointed in you, grandson. He's like, "But I was the Pokemon League champion." Was. What have you done for me lately?
Oh my goodness. That's not even like
So,
exaggerating either.
no, it's not. And in Let's Go Pikachu, they change it. So they change the dialogue at the end where after you beat your rival, who is a different character. Blue is like in it, but in the remake of it, he's somebody who had beaten it, years ago or something, and he's just kind of around. And you could battle him at some point in the post game, whatever. Your
Yeah.
new, lighter, softer rival, after you beat him, Professor Oak says, "I'm proud of you. You had a bond with your Pokemon." Then he looks at the other guy and goes, "I'm proud of you too. Come in here." And I'm like, "Oh, see, even though this technically makes more sense, it's not as fun."
Right.
Like, sure, it is more logical. It certainly makes more sense. But it's just not as fun as seeing Professor Oak go, "Good job, Red. Blue, you're a failure. You lost. Sorry.
How
Maybe
dare
if you
you?
just loved your Pokemon more." And he's like, "I'm 11. Isn't that pretty good?"
Smell you later, Gramps.
Smell you later. He had the great theme. One thing I will say, Pokemon consistently has never had bad music. It's had good music in every generation, and Generation 8 probably has my favorite soundtrack of all of them. The gym leader theme in Pokemon Sword and Shield is so great. And the wild area theme, they use bagpipes, which
Nice.
immediately makes it the Chad theme.
By definition.
By definition, use of bagpipes makes it the Chad theme.
Hmm.
So I will say that Generation 2, the Generation 2, they had the rival was, see, in Generation 1, your rival was just kind of like an arrogant an arrogant asshole, but he wasn't really a bad guy. He was always kind of helping you out. He was
Yeah.
just full of himself. In Generation 2, the rival starts off by robbing the professor and stealing his Pokemon, and when he first meets you, he shoves you, and you actually go flying into the air.
Right.
So, the
I
Generation 2 rival
so
is
hold
like
on.
a bad person.
Right. I actually like the Gen 2 rival. And
Oh,
a
I
lot
love the Gen 2 rival.
right? Like there's for a rival, it it felt like there always needs to be more of an edge to things than people are willing to do. Like with uh, what which one is it? With rivals. Like if there's no edge to them, it doesn't ever feel like um, it's worth it. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, the rivals in the later games, that's been the biggest thing. They haven't had like a mean rival since then. Like they've
Yep.
had some side rivals that were meaner. Like in Generation 8, they had a character called Creed who was kind of a dick, and he was sort of a rival, but your main rival, too nice.
Yeah. I was thinking like with um, um, like let's say that we create our own Pokemon one. Like you don't want to have your rival like beating his Pokemon to death or anything like that, but it's like if there's no edge to them, if they don't have any reason for you to fear them or to think they're yeah, a really bad guy, like totally, bro. Um it just doesn't it's you can't do anything with it in the story writing because you can't have a redemption arc if no one believes they're bad, and you can't really have anything edgy to them if
Well, they try to give them arcs in the new ones. Hop in Generation 8, who is the name of your rival in Generation 8, and they have like he's the brother of the champion. And here's the thing about Generation 8 and Pokemon Sword and Shield. The frustrating thing is that there are pieces that are there that could make for good writing, and they don't use any of them properly. It's really weird. So,
right.
the idea here is that, like, you, the main character, and these are the pieces that I've seen, and they, to be clear here, they don't do anything with this, even though I am convinced they 100% should have, because it's all set up for it.
Mhm.
But you are the son of a Wooloo farmer, so the sheep Pokemon in Gen 8,
Right.
and like you live on a Wooloo farm. That's the thing. It's an actual farm, and your friend Hop is the brother of the champion, and he clearly lives like he's rich. You know, you live in this tiny town called Wedgehurst. He lives a little bit away in a much nicer house with a much, his brother's like this mega celebrity, right? And
Mhm.
his dream is to be a Pokemon champion. So I feel like Generation 8 should kind of have been like a Rocky story where you're the son of a Wooloo farmer and your rival is the brother of the champion, the most famous man in the region. And you should have had
Yeah.
that rivalry is tailor made for drama. It's a good setup,
Yep.
but they do nothing with it. The problem is that Hop is just terrible at Pokemon. And by the end of the game, he quits,
Yeah.
early quits, and becomes a professor instead, which isn't necessarily like a bad idea or anything, but I feel like this should have been much more shonen-esque. If that,
Right.
it is Pokemon after all, and it should have been like they were really pushing gyms as a sport. So it should have been something like a Rocky story. You're this underdog Wooloo farmer, and you have to impress the champion to get your license to challenge the gyms at one point in the game. And I feel like, Hop was always going to get it because Hop was the brother of the champion. But now you're just this plucky kid, and you've been on such a good show in front of this guy that you're being given the chance of a lifetime. You know, and that should have been the game. That's what it should have focused on. Forget, and if they really want to push away from like, a larger story, that's fine. Forget all the saving the world stuff. Focus on like, the underdog story of you, the main character, rising through, taking on all of these people, and none of them think that you could do it. But it would require Pokemon to have a little bit more of an edge to it than it likes to have nowadays, because it would
Mhm.
require people not believing in you at certain points. You would have to overcome people who weren't necessarily nice all the time, which again, they don't really like doing nowadays, and that's kind of a shame. And And this theme, too, of like overcoming class is present throughout the game. You have another character named Piers, who's a gym leader, and their big gimmick of the generation is Dynamaxing. It's not important what it is, just it's something that you could do with your Pokemon to supercharge them. And the gym leader Piers, his gimmick is that he doesn't Dynamax. And if you battle him, you have to battle him without Dynamaxing in the battle. Which is cool. I think that's good for one gym leader to have that as a thing. That's a fine idea. But Piers is actually like he's a rock star, and he comes from this poor town that's that's like graffitied all over and has a punk culture called Sightmouth. And this whole thing, like, there's so many layers to this that you could peel into if you actually decide to do the work. Like, Piers clearly doesn't want to be a gym leader. He doesn't even really like Dynamaxing. He wants to be a musician. However, Spikemuth is poor, and the fact that he is a gym leader makes him a celebrity and could potentially bring them income, and maybe he could revive the town. And his sister is also on the gym challenge, and maybe she's trying to raise awareness, and maybe she feels guilty that her brother can't perform the way that he wants to. So she wants to become a success so that she could take over for him one day at the gym. Like, there's potential stories here, but they just do nothing with any of this. And the frustrating thing is that I'm not even coming up with this. Like, this is in the game. They just don't touch it at all. It's really weird. Generation 1 didn't have much of a story, like the Red, Blue, Yellow games, but Generation 1 didn't need much of a story. The story was you were going around completing the gym challenge, and Team Rocket got in your way. So to complete the gym challenge, you had to get them out of the way. There wasn't much to it, but it made perfect sense.
Yeah.
Sure, probably if you dug into it, it didn't really make much sense, like where the police or whatever. But honestly, all of these things are just they're not so much plot holes as they're just not explained.
Right.
What happened to the police? Well, we don't know. That doesn't necessarily make it a plot hole. Just the police aren't there for some reason. We can't access them. And even then, this is all much more forgivable in the context of a game. The idea, though, that you set up all of these pieces and things, and you just don't do anything with any of them.
Yeah.
Pokemon Generation 1 was also and Generation 2 was, really picked up on this, and Generation 2 is one of, honestly, the Johto games are some of the all-time great sequels in gaming history. They took all of the potential of the Generation 1 games and went all out with it.
Yeah.
Because they were, and I'm actually, I'm dead serious about that. I think that the Generation, I don't know if they're necessarily the best games in the series, but as far as being sequels to the Generation 1 Pokemon games, the Gold, Silver, Crystal, Gen 2 games are some of the best games, and the best sequels in the history of video games, because Pokemon had all of those glitches and it had all of those issues, and Gen 2 realized that it had something there, and it took all of that potential and it went all out with it. It added a new typing and balanced the battling system, fixed the glitches, allow you to access the first region again while also building this new region, while really doing a great job with the world building in Johto. The Johto world building is fantastic. And it's something, though, it was a structure that they got from the Generation 1 games. Like, Generation 1 had this great area called, it had the Pokemon Mansion, where you could go and you could find, and if you explored the Pokemon Mansion, you could find all of this information about Mew and Mewtwo. And this was all fantastic because all of it's just there. You don't need to find it. But if you do, and you find Mewtwo at the end of the game, famously, in the unknown dungeon at the end of the game, you'll know why Mewtwo is there if you took the time to explore the Pokemon Mansion. Because it explains that they found Mew, they tried to clone it, they created Mewtwo, but Mewtwo grew too powerful for them and escaped. Now the mansion has been freaking abandoned, and all of this messed up stuff has happened, and you can connect all of those dots and figure out what Mewtwo is doing in the unknown dungeon. And the Johto games just have this sort of thing in spades, and it's
Yeah.
just a shame that they kind of lost this a little bit. And they brought it back a little bit with the most recent DLC, the Crown Tundra. It was all
Mm-hmm.
about exploration and finding clues and things. But it was more railroaded than Pokemon used to have. By the way, favorite legendaries? As I'm looking at the comments, Orem said, I like the Dragon Gym Leader was weather-based. Yes, I agree. This is in Sword and Shield. Yeah, I like that he was weather-based. It would have been nice if he wasn't the Dragon Gym Leader and they just called him the Weather Gym Leader. But, that's a little bit too much innovation for Pokemon. You need another Dragon Master. At least one per game.
Yep.
My,
But dragons are so cool.
they are, actually. Not
Yeah.
unironically, yes.
Yeah.
They actually are. But, my favorite legendary... Actually, I'm going to go off the rails a little bit and move all the way into Gen 7 and say Solgaleo. And unfortunately, we can't show any images of Nintendo because Nintendo are like vultures with their copyright strikes. But look up Solgaleo. It looks very, very cool. It is a really nice looking legendary. So I'm going new school for my favorite legendary. Favorite classic legendary? I'll go Mewtwo. He's easy. He's a good pick.
I always like the red Gyarados. But Tyranitar was probably my favorite actual um, like Pokemon to get.
See, the red Gyarados, I did not learn until years later the red Gyarados was just a shiny Gyarados. So you
Yes.
know what shiny Pokemon are, right?
Yeah.
I did not for a long time, and it was not for a long time that I learned that the red Gyarados was just a shiny Gyarados. However, that red Gyarados was friggin' strong. I remember using him, and he would just wreck his way through the game.
Yep.
Because Gyarados is a great Pokemon. Tyranitar was also a great Pokemon, but Tyranitars were hard to get. Now they're easy to get because of, how many games there are and how easy it is to trade
Mm-hmm.
and to train that Pokemon. But back in the day, you had to work for a long time to train up your Larvitar if you were going to
Yep.
work with a Tyranitar.
Basically,
That's
yep.
another thing modern Pokemon has lost, that difficult, using the Tyranitar, sure, anybody could get it uh, if you trained up your Larvitar, but you had to work for it. You don't anymore.
Umbreon and Espeon are so convoluted to evolve. I never got it right.
Yes. That is one of the nice things about looking in the wild. They have the wild area with the head Pokemon now. That is one of the nice things. As soon as I saw an Espeon, I went, holy crap, an Espeon. I always wanted one of those, but they were a pain in the ass to get. I am getting this.
Yep.
Same thing. It was cool. It is admittedly cool to see so many Pokemon where I would go, oh my god, I've always wanted. They were such a pain in the ass to get. Only thing is, now that you have it, you're like, well, now what?
Hmm.
Now I have it. It's a great Pokemon. Thing is, I don't do competitive battling. There are multiple reasons I don't do competitive battling. First, it's that getting a competitive ready team, while easier than ever now, is still a chore. You know, you still have to put some work in, and that's too much work for me. And second off, it's because now people are really freaking good, and you will lose a lot
Yep.
if you try competitive battling.
And like
Because
so
there are some great trainers out there nowadays. It's crazy.
and like the eugenics programs for these Pokemon, like holy cow. Holy cow.
I mean, it sounds funny when you say it that way, but that's basically what it is.
I mean, yeah, sure, it's no different than horse breeding, but also like it is seriously terrifying to me. Like these people will have no
700x later,
right.
got my 6 IV.
Finally the right
You know,
combinations of incest and the other things just combine together
first off,
into
Ben, just breed it with a Ditto. That's what Dittos are for. That's all they're for. I want to find that somebody made a comic that was hilarious, where they would go, where they just showed a Ditto that was sitting and said, "Come here, baby," and just a Ditto like lying on a bed, and he goes,
right.
"Let me show you all the forms of love."
Uh,
It was funny.
that is actually pretty funny though.
I do not breed. Breeding is too much of a hassle for me. Just not worth the time. Much like shiny hunting, I also people shiny hunt Pokemon now, and I've always wanted to find a shiny Pokemon. Finally, I found a shiny Pidgey in Let's Go Pikachu of all things, and that was very cool and all. But it was like, see, that was legit because that was a full odd shiny. So that was in modern Pokemon. It used to be like 1 in 8,000 or something. They cut it in half to like 1 in 4,000 or something to find a shiny. So I got my like 1 in 4,000 odd chance to find a shiny Pidgeot. But now they're making it easier and easier to get shinies, and it's just like it's no longer special. You know,
Like I
most
never
of them aren't that cool looking.
I know, right? They're just slightly different colored. And like
If you have a 1 in 4,000 or 1 in 8,000 chance of getting it, it's cool. But if it's just, oh, this is the weird variant version, like who cares?
by the way, I want to make it clear, like lottery odds is like 1 in 3 or 1 in 5 or something. There was a lottery scratch off game that was 1 in 10, but each time you could only win 100s or 200s. Like playing the lottery has better odds than finding a shiny Pokemon.
Oh yeah, it took me 20 years of playing Pokemon to find a freaking shiny. And this was at half odds too. This was in the newer games where they cut the odds to like 1 in 4,000. And then I finally found it. Though the cruelest of all was in Pokemon Emerald. So the post game of Pokemon Emerald has this amazing feature that, for some ungodly reason, they did not bring back in the Gen 3 remakes, which still makes me mad. But called the Battle Frontier, which had like different facilities where you could do like specialty battling, with different rule sets and whatever, which is awesome already. But one of
Right.
them was called the Battle Factory. And the gimmick of the Battle Factory was that you rented Pokemon that they had available for you to fight other rental Pokemon, which is really fun. And it allows you to use Pokemon that you normally wouldn't use before, and move sets that you wouldn't normally use.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, like, I still play the Emerald Battle Factory just to play the Battle Factory. But whatever. The cruelest of all was that I found a shiny Pokemon in the Battle Factory. And they're not your Pokemon. You
Wow.
don't keep them. They're just rental. And I'm pretty sure I took a photo of it with my phone at the time just to prove that I saw it. So I'm like, this is still a 1 in 8,000 chance. But I was pretty salty.
Yeah.
But yeah, to put it another way. So if we go from gens 1 through, I think, 5, gens 1 through 5, it's like a 1 in 8,000 chance, or 2 through 5, because there's no shinies in Gen 1. So gens 2 through 5, it's a 1 in 8,000 or so chance to get a shiny. And in gens 6 through 8, outside of special circumstances where they allow, they manipulate it so that the odds are better, it's like a 1 in 4,000 chance.
Yep.
And in one of those newer games with the 1 in 4,000 odds, I finally found a full odds shiny. So 20 years. That's crazy.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you whether or not I got shinies back in the day. All I know is that I wasn't looking out for them.
Oh, hey, I'm looking at Yahoo, and Biden taps all female senior White House press team. Oh man, looking forward to that.
When you said taps, I'm like on the butt. Like, what is this?
uh, that's literally what the headline says. Biden taps all female senior White House press team. That
Gotta
has
catch
to
'em
be a
all.
troll. Now that you say it, they
Gotta
gotta
catch 'em
know, right?
all. He wants them for his Pokemon League. Gets a blonde and brunette, and he'll finally be popular with the kids.
Then, then there's the world of Pokemon fan games, some of which are outstanding. Pokemon Uranium is probably my favorite Pokemon.
So, what is the plotline of Pokemon Uranium? Does it have a plot?
Uranium. Very
Are
much
you?
has a plot.
Was that?
It very much has a plot. I wasn't being sarcastic, like that wasn't a joke. That actually might be my favorite Pokemon game. Uh, so Pokemon Uranium. First off, the story behind Pokemon Uranium was that when they came out with it, Nintendo issued a cease and desist in like 2 hours, but by then it was way too late and it had been mirrored all over the internet, and I downloaded it long after that, and you could find it now easily.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. But anyway, so Pokemon Uranium is about your mother was a scientist and your father is a Pokemon ranger, which by the way, first check mark, first point. Bring the Pokemon Rangers into a regular Pokemon game. Thumbs up. But because that was a spin-off series that I don't care about, but it does exist, and the fact that they're acknowledging it makes me happy. Anyway, your dad's a Pokemon Ranger and your mother is a scientist, and when you're like a toddler, uh, there's some sort of nuclear accident, and there's a nuclear reactor meltdown, and your mother is goes missing after the blast, and nobody knows what happened to her. So years pass, and now you're old enough that you could go on your Pokemon journey. So presumably you're somewhere between 11 and 15 because that's the ages that you leave in the Pokemon games. I don't know if they have an official one. I think you're 11 something. And your rival in this game is your bratty next door neighbor who's a year younger than you. And he's really jealous of how good at Pokemon you are, which is really funny. And the story is that nuclear reactors start melting down all across the region and infecting the Pokemon and turning them into nuclear Pokemon. And you have to figure out what's going on with the nuclear reactors. And also there's, the typical collect 8 badges and defeat the Pokemon League thing. and that's it. That's the game. And it's harder than most, and it's kind of darker, but I really like Uranium because I feel like it's one of the only ones that gets the tone right. Normally people will try and do like darker Pokemon, but they'll push too far,
Mm-hmm.
and it becomes like a parody. And I think that Pokemon Uranium got it just right where it went darker and it felt more adult. Like it was, for people who grew up with Pokemon like me,
Mm-hmm.
but without descending into like, a joke. It wasn't grimdark. It wasn't ridiculous or anything like that. You know, and it all ends well. Still has the same like goofy Pokemon humor. Like there's a town full of ninjas and whatever that you eventually make it to, and you become the Hokage, which is funny. At one point, one of the gym leaders gets captured by giant bug Pokemon and brought into a place in the middle of a forest known as the Ant Hill, and you have to rescue him. But my favorite moment of the game is when a nuclear reactor is about to melt down and all of the Pokemon Rangers show up and say, "We have to go now, get on the back of my Pokemon." And as you evacuate, they show a little cutscene of the nuclear reactor melting down and the radiation spreading over that area, while like this eerie version of the Pallet Town theme plays in the background.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like this horror movie version of from Generation 1, the classic Pallet Town theme is playing. And it's just fantastic. I loved it. I thought it was great.
It's pretty
It's a
awesome.
pretty difficult game, but it's fun. The fake mons are all very good. I've seen some people criticize it for like lack of balance or whatever, and I don't know. That might be true. I don't know enough about game design to say for sure, but I liked it. There are other good mods though. There's Pokemon Team Rocket Edition is a pretty fun one where you start off as a Team Rocket grunt in Generation 1 and you play through the story of Generation 1, while Red is beating his way through the game. You're going through the game doing jobs for Giovanni as a Team Rocket grunt, rising through the system, and you could steal the Pokemon of players of trainers that you beat in the game, which is pretty cool. And they have this whole story, where like Professor Oak, uh, there was a war with Johto or something, and Professor Oak was convicted of war crimes and had to give up battling and was stuck in Pallet Town, so he genetically engineers Red to be like his slave, which is why Red doesn't speak in the games. And it sounds bad, but it's actually pretty great.
No, that
It,
does sound amazing, actually. He's the perfect Pokemon fighting machine.
exactly, that was the idea. It's actually a very good game, like in its own right. I enjoyed it. I did it as a challenge run with no stealing Pokemon. It was fairly difficult that way. If I had decided to steal Pokemon, it probably would have been pretty easy. So make of that what you will. There's Pokemon Glazed Edition, which is that one. There's really nothing special about it. It's just like a Pokemon game in a fan-made region, and in this case, there's like dimension hopping, particularly like there's some portal opening between like the quote-unquote real world and Pokemon world, but as far as it goes for the story in the game, it's really just, Pokemon has done dimension hopping before. It's really just a Pokemon game in a new region. However, it's very well done. Uh, Similarly, Pokemon Gaia, there's no gimmick to it. It's just a Pokemon game that happens to take place in an original fan-made region with some fan-made Pokemon, and there's not it's not offering anything it's not more adult, it's not anything new in that sense, but it's very very well made. So those are, I would say, my four favorites are Pokemon Uranium, Pokemon Glaze, Pokemon Gaia, and Team Rocket Edition. I would say Pokemon Uranium if you want something harder and a little more adult. Pokemon Team Rocket Edition if you want to, do want to try like a little bit of a twist on the classic Pokemon formula. And Pokemon
Mm-hmm.
Glaze and Pokemon Gaia if you just want more Pokemon. And they, they give you a new region and they're very. I've beaten all of them. I've enjoyed. Pokemon Uranium's probably my favorite Pokemon of the mainline games. It's hard for me to put anything over the New Jersey Pokemon games.
Oh.
So Gen 5, baby.
All right.
I like
I'm.
shorts. I
Was
like
that?
shorts. They're nice and comfy. Root 4. Yeah.
Ugh. Yeah. All right. I'm pretty done for the night. I've been up since 5:30 and earlier. We will.
I got to spend the chat talking, cheerfully jabbering about Pokemon, so I consider that a win.
Yeah. Absolutely. Anyway, guys, thank you for the new viewers. Thank you to everyone. As always, be sure to look out for the next episode of Pinkerton's Ghost and check out the last one that, well, just came out earlier on Friday. Have a good one.